It's too late. I hit the button. Once you hit the button, it's over. You don't know when it's gonna come, but it's coming.
Right.
So yeah, welcome everybody back for another day, another horrifying day of news.
You
another what?
You yell at us all the time
What?
about making very good. Kennedy yells at us all the time about many people on the show. We do our best. He's very wrathful, but you talk about good intros. So we can't just say, "Hey, welcome. How's everybody doing?" We know how you're doing. You're doing bad. And the reason why you're doing bad right now, no matter where you are in the United States, I can ask that question. I can be 99% sure you're doing bad because of capitalism. Whether it's you live on the West Coast, half of the country is on fire. You live like in an inner city, you're dealing with police violence, and rural cities too. If you are somebody who's low on income, you're dealing with a Medicaid crisis. If you got kids, you're dealing with the COVID crisis. There's lots of crises going on, and at the root of them is our system of constantly generating wealth, and that system of constant wealth generation that goes to the top. It doesn't just exist inside our own borders and inside of our own lives. The root of so much of how these things are funded and how we have politicians that are insulated from the political system is like the influence of money and money that comes from overseas exploitation. And in the same way that our current United States was built off of, in the past, off free labor from a slave class, we have just exploited labor that might not be within our national borders, but is at the root of a lot of tension. And that's commonly called imperialism. And we put together a panel just talking about imperialism for a little bit. And it's going to be fun to listen to because we've got a great panel here with us. Rara, talk about yourself.
Hey, what's up? I'm Rara Imler. I am born and raised on Guam. I am a Chamorro woman, which is the indigenous population there. So I'll be talking about that today, about the U.S.'s relationship with Guam and the kind of tendrils of colonialism that still exists there. So,
Aaron, what's up? How are you doing?
Chilling.
How are you not on every single episode of this show?
I don't know, man.
You're so busy.
I am a little bit busy trying to start my own shit with the help of you guys as well. I'm doing all right. I feel like I'm here because my parents are from Jamaica. So like I am the second, well, I'm a Jamaican American, I guess second generation. But yes, aside from Makua, I'm also have some kind of personal, I guess, interest in this. I'm kind of just here to talk with y'all about imperialism generally and learn a little bit about my parents, their home country. So yeah.
Akua, what's up?
Well, I'm the resident Jamaican, friend of the pod. But yeah, I'm Akua Walters. Among other things, I'm apparently a political contributor here. And I help to pontificate about things like colonialism and kind of give another perspective on on capitalism and kind of like colonialism and how that affects the Caribbean and how that relates to the Caribbean and that kind of a thing. But specifically, my knowledge base is about Caribbean history and I hopefully I can shed some light on that today.
So
yeah, absolutely. To bring it back to my intro that I was gonna do, I was gonna say
this is why we talk
a lot of the bad stuff that's going on in the news right now, just horrifying things that we've seen coming out. And in particular, I think one of the most horrifying news items that I've seen maybe all year is the forced hysterectomies at the ICE centers. When we look at stuff like that, this is a direct product of colonialism. And as long as we're doing colonialism, we can't like root it out of like our backyard. Like it's going to continue to root its head out here. And like a lot of people think that the colonial era is over. And that like a lot of these places are free or close enough to free that like it's basically fine. And that, like maybe there's some exploitation here and there, but it's not as systemic as blah, blah, whatever. So Aqua, I want to give you a chance to take the floor here and talk about Jamaica's independence. Jamaica's an independent nation, right? That's what if I Google Jamaica, it says it's independent. So I think you should tell everybody what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to keep this tight, right? Like, I just want to talk about just some context. I just want to talk about Jamaica's actual independence when that happened, our relationship to the monarchy, and the Commonwealth. That's a term that you'll hear a lot throughout this podcast, the Commonwealth, and basically bring it all together and talk about the systems of government and how those systems are used to basically let's just say apply economic pressure to countries like Jamaica from here on in. So, like, to start off, like, Jamaica gained independence back in 1960, in the 1960s, 1962 specifically. It was essentially the British government that passed an act that said, hey, Jamaica, guess what? You're gonna be independent. How do you feel? But here's the catch. You're going to be independent, but kind of not, because the Queen is still going to be your head of state. And we're going to have this dude who is not even Jamaican back in those days, who's not even Jamaican, who we're going to call let's call him the Governor General. That's the title that we're going to bestow on this guy. And that guy essentially controls the army. And, like, I don't know if you guys ever watched Pirates of the Caribbean, right?
Yeah.
But Elizabeth's father was the governor, was playing the governor at that time. Like, that's what a GG is, a governor general. Like, that's the guy that represents the Queen. So he controls the army, and he essentially holds the government hostage if the Queen feels like it, right? Like, that's never been done. But it's implied that if we ever piss the Queen off too much, yeah, she can basically dissolve the government and rule the country by decree through the GG. I'm sure many Jamaican scholars might have a problem with my characterization, but it's not too far off, right? And that's kind of where the issue, and that's the kind of like relationship that we've seen America employ towards its colonies. Like, when we think of the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and Puerto Rico, like, we kind of see those types of relationships reverberated through that type of neocolonial, through that type of neocolonial relationship. And, like, I feel like we can't start to address U.S. and even British colonialism without understanding the Monroe Doctrine. I've mentioned the Monroe Doctrine before, but I feel like we need to understand that, like, the Monroe Doctrine is basically James Monroe. I don't remember which president James Monroe was, but he had this doctrine which was basically like telling, can I cuss?
Fuck yeah, you can.
Okay, cool. Like, basically telling Europe to fuck off and leave the Americans alone, right? Because, like, this was 1823, right? Like America.
I just want to say, Aqua said fuck, and our viewers shot up. We got like 6
Oh
viewers.
no! Oh no! The fuck. It be like that sometimes. But yeah, like 1776 was the Civil War, right? So Monroe had already 1823 was basically around Monroe's presidency, and he had a policy of, if you come here, if you come in, he basically said, all of the Caribbean is our backyard. All of the Caribbean and the Americas and Latin America is the US's backyard. If you come here, we will fight. Mm-hmm. So the Portuguese, the Spanish, the British, the Dutch, all of these people now had to contend with a new superpower, which was the United States. And Monroe was flexing, right? And essentially, the Monroe Doctrine has been quoted time and time again for some of the worst atrocities in the Caribbean carried out under Reagan, under Nixon. shit, even under Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower, right? Because
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
because like Eisenhower was the Banana Republics dude, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm talking too much. I'd love to hear
No.
from you guys.
You're good. I would kind of like to pose this as the question to everybody is like, if your head of state is the queen before and after your independence, then what is your independence? And really more so, like what, though we can admit that like these things can be a little messy, like what does it mean to have independence?
Yeah. I mean, like economic independence, and that inherently comes with like recognition of political rights, you know? So, I mean, the fact that these countries, they do not have any autonomy over their own economic affairs about, you know, what goes out, what's produced there, what goes out, and what comes in. They're just cash crops, right? For these like huge imperial economies like in Europe and, well, the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I think when we talk about like actual real concrete independence, you have to like consider self-determination by the indigenous people that have lived there and, you know, been there forever, and who are the most impacted by whatever political policies come in and out. And if you don't have that self-determination, if you are under the thumb of a, you know, of a different ruler, you know, hundreds, thousands of miles away, like really your independence is just, you know, appeasement really to the more radical elements, or, you know, of the proletariat there that desire true independence. So it's more just like a method of kind of, you know, controlling a native population without really like giving them what they need, which is self-determination.
Yeah. Brandon, do you have any thoughts? Can't hear you, Brandon.
Determination is kind of vital to any political project, because we're not just talking about like your ability to make your own choices in an abstract sense, but in terms of your economy, your personal economy. If you don't have autonomy in your political decision making, then you're going to be exploited no matter what happens. If you don't have control over where your money goes and whether it goes to people that live in your neighborhood or people who are in some cases just the suburbs away, but for historical example, are across an ocean, just that historically has led to not just economic unrest, but also social like unrest, because in order to have that kind of system where there's so much exploitation, you've got to distract people from just like revolting against you. And you have so much social divisiveness that's allowed because of it being a stabilizing force in this bad economy.
Yeah. And I want to add real quick too. I think like it's useful to think about Lenin's idea of imperialism being like the highest, well, when he was talking about it, the highest stage of capitalism, and the fact that capitalism has to expand out of domestic markets into new markets, and you know it has to extract raw material, and well, who is going to furnish that raw material, right? It's going to be the native people there. How do you do that, right? You mean you don't do it through paying them a wage, you do it through coercion, through terror, right? Through selecting a few number,
right,
and of the native population to control everyone else, right? This is what, you know, colonialism is specifically. So yeah, I mean,
right, yeah. I just want to speak on that a little bit because it is important when we talk about like self-determination, to not get it confused with having a small representative, like capitalist class that dictates the terms of our independence as indigenous people. Like you have to include the working class in all of those decisions. Otherwise, it isn't truly an independence movement. It is just another, it is just like reinforcing the capitalist hierarchy in just another form.
Absolutely. I want to maybe pose like one more way of thinking about this, that then I want to kick it back to Aqua to talk a little bit more about Jamaican history, because I think it's going to be very relevant, is that sometimes it seems like these acts of quote unquote granting independence that have happened to these like colonialized places in like the last 50 years or so are kind of like when the parents kick an 18-year-old out and give them no help, and are like you got to go live on your own now, kid. Like you got to provide your own housing and stuff. And the kid's like, Dad, you make $120,000 a year. Couldn't you like help me rent my first apartment? And Dad's like, no, get out of here. Like come back in 10 years when you're an adult, you know, like that seems to be the way a lot of times when these independences are granted, like to Jamaica, realistically, Jamaica's government is still expected to operate under certain terms and conditions that are inherently colonial. But like now there's like even more responsibility on the people of Jamaica and like on the systems there itself to like also support itself at the same time.
Yeah, and that's true, Kennedy. I mean, nowhere is that more true than when you look at the two-party system that has developed in Jamaica. Essentially, we have a super leftist, used to be super leftist party. This might sound familiar to you. We have a used to be super leftist party that was so radically left that, I think I shared this picture with you guys where it was Maurice Bishop, one of the founding fathers of Jamaica, Michael Manley, and Fidel Castro walking across an airfield. It was within that decade that the CARI Forum was convened, and what the CARI Forum was essentially a way for like a precursor to what's now called referred to as the Caribbean Single Market Economy, or the CSME. Or CARICOM, the Caribbean Community, right? And basically what that was the Caribbean's attempt to consolidate itself into an economic bloc, but that was thwarted by various, let's just say, external government and powers that prefer to trade with each country, each Caribbean country, as separate little entities versus one super trading bloc. Kind of like the way most of Latin America gets to be treated as one trading bloc, like the BRIC economies, for instance, But to bring home the point, yeah, there is definitely a two-faced. Can you guys hear me? Okay, perfect. Yeah, like there is definitely a two-faced approach to independence where when Jamaica gained independence in 1962, the British basically had a hands-on approach at that point, which is basically, we'll guide you into democracy. We'll help you to establish agriculture, to quote unquote establish agriculture. And basically one of the most fucked up things that the British government and the US government facilitated during that point was transitioning Jamaica from an agrarian society to a service-based economy. So back in the day, Jamaica used to be one of the Jamaica, Barbados, I think it was like Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad. Like we used to be the foremost purveyors of sugarcane. I don't know if you know anything about sugarcane, but like agave, it's used to make alcohol. Sugarcane is used to make molasses, alcohol like rum. What else did we make out of? Right, and sugar, of course. And those were some of the most those were like the cash crops of the Caribbean. When we gained independence, a lot of those estates were broken up and controlled by and sold to British interests. Like we still have a tobacco company in Jamaica called British, I think it's like British West Indian Tobacco or something like that, something very similar to that. But it sells cigarettes in Jamaica. But while Britain gave us independence, they slowly pushed this idea of, yeah, you guys have beautiful beaches. You guys should transition into a service economy. Let tourism be the bedrock of your society. Don't worry about growing food anymore. We will trade with you. We'll sell you food from Britain. We'll sell you food from the United States. Don't worry about it. Right? So what's interesting is one of the results of that is when pandemics and natural disasters hit, you have ports shut down for extended periods of time, and that disrupts the supply chain in Jamaica of certain goods to some extent. Because now we've learned up to this point we've learned about supply chain resilience, and we've done some companies at least have gotten the memo and started storing up to 6 months worth of goods in the back because of supply chain disruptions. But the British government hasn't done Jamaica very many favors as it relates to helping us to develop an economy that is truly independent.
Can I ask a quick question, just to kind of back up a little bit, because I'm curious about this. So, as I understand it, and this is going way back before independence, still during colonization, slavery or slaveocracy as well. Haiti, right? Because of the fact that the ratio of black slaves on the island to the white overseers was able to have a revolution, the first black revolution, right? Why is it that Jamaica, the same thing didn't happen in Jamaica? Was it that
Don't come with that.
I'm sure there are forces at work as to why that is so. That's kind of why I'm asking what.
When Toussaint led try to understand that like this history of the Caribbean and revolutions is something that deeply frustrates me, because try to understand, right? Like you're right. Like Toussaint led the first all-black revolution, quote unquote, all-black revolution in the Caribbean, in the world, really, to overthrow the French government and quote unquote free Haiti, right? Try to understand that it wasn't until about 200, brother, I don't think it was less than 50 years, more than 200 years before revolutions spread to Jamaica, and it was independent of Haiti. Like Haiti, like the Haitians didn't, which I think it was short-sighted on Toussaint's part. The Haitians didn't spread the revolution, Aaron, right? Like they didn't like go to Jamaica and be like and start planting the seeds of quote unquote freedom, right? Like they stayed over there. They stayed over
like a Wakanda mentality, right?
And fought with the Spanish. And fought with the Spanish over in Dominican Republic. Like you can ask any Dominican, most Dominicans in Dominica, like what's the relationship between Dominica and Haiti currently? Like you can even see that at the border between Dominica and Haiti. Well, we say the Dominican Republic. We say the Dominican Republic. You guys call it DR. It's one of those weird quirks. But the fact of the matter is, yeah, you're right. Like revolution didn't spread to Jamaica for another 100 years. It took people like Paul Bogle and George William Gordon to actually like march in the streets and get hung for it in order to incite rebellion in Jamaica, right? So I find it as much as you do perplexing that given the resources that Haiti had, that it didn't spread that kind of idea through the different colonies.
Yeah.
I have a question about that actually. And if you don't know the answer, that's totally cool. But I'm just wondering, what do you think made Haiti so isolationist with their revolution as opposed to like spreading it, beyond their island? Like, do you think there was anything like historical that lent itself to that, or was it like a cultural thing?
You have to look at when talking about these types of events, when talking about revolutions in the Caribbean, you have to understand that you have to compare Toussaint to Castro, right? What Castro did right was he was a great diplomat. Like if you remember, like Cuba has played a central role in most revolutions throughout the region, going as far back as Simon Bolivar, if you've ever heard that name. Like that guy actually took refuge in Cuba at one point, right? So Cuba was a known refuge for revolutionaries from way back in the day. But what Castro did versus Toussaint was he essentially rolled out the red carpet to every other country but the United States and said, hey, if you want to trade with us, we're totally open and we're totally cool with that. Like up until the most recent president of Venezuela, up until Maduro, that was kind of the understanding that Venezuela operated under too. Like Venezuela, fun fact, actually owned a majority of the oil refinery in Jamaica. Like they had a majority stakeholdership in the oil refinery in Jamaica, right? Like fun fact. And the Jamaican, I think it was at the behest of international powers. I will not name names. Hint, hint, cough, cough. Jamaica was asked to divest Venezuela's interest out of our oil refinery. That's called Petrojam now. Before the program was called Petrocaribe. Antigua, I think it was like Antigua, Jamaica, Barbados, like most of those countries received oil from Venezuela. Up until a certain point, we now officially receive oil from Mexico mostly, right? Right now, Guyana, and I'm going off on a tangent here, but forgive me. Right now, Guyana is one of the newest regional, one of the newest countries in the world to produce oil. It's apparently they have as much oil, if not more, than Venezuela, and Venezuela has more oil than the Middle East. Fun fact again, and it's weird to me that we haven't been trading oil, and this is just conjecture here from this point. It's weird to me that Jamaica, again, we're talking about independence. It's weird to me that Jamaica and the other Caribbean countries never thought of it, never said, oh, Guyana is now producing oil. Why don't we just buy oil from Guyana? Because Guyana is a member of CARICOM. As a matter of fact, CARICOM's headquarters is located in Georgetown, Guyana, right? And one of the foremost, let's say, oil-based economies in the Caribbean is Trinidad and Tobago. Like their expertise in oil refinery is unmatched in the region, right? But there has been this focus on picking the Caribbean countries apart and trying to get them to not cooperate. That we've seen this type of culture perpetuate through Black culture, whether it be the Tutsis in Rwanda and that genocide, whether it be the beef between Biggie and Tupac, the East Coast versus the West Coast, whether it be the way how Trinidadians and Jamaicans and Barbadians relate to each other outside of the University of the West Indies. There are these constant back and forths where true economic independence is elusive because there doesn't seem to be any real inroads made towards collaboration.
Yeah, I would just add that I think the Middle East is probably a really good example of that, where we're just talking about a resource-rich place with regards to oil, and the way throughout the 19th and 20th and 21st century, the way that Western powers have pitted, Middle Eastern countries, specifically Arab countries, against each other, and have prevented them from sort of being able to kind of collectivize and dominate themselves like this main, source of energy. So yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think that when we just kind of look at these situations, we're seeing a lot of the same patterns repeated in these different places. And again, like who's benefiting and who's losing. And I think just even this conversation of like pitting people against each other, all this stuff's really important. And it's important to remember with that in particular. And I think this might apply to some of the conversation we're just having in general right now, that, not everybody, got along before the colonizers arrived. And that's like, a big issue with some of this stuff too, is that like, people have to overcome huge cultural divides a lot of times to have the kind of revolution that can overthrow the imperial powers, because it's like, these are cultures in some cases that have been at war for hundreds or thousands of years, or have been in hostility, or whatever.
You're not wrong, Kennedy. I mean,
yeah.
the Aztec, a great example of that would be the Aztecs, Mayans, and Incas, right? Like those are the three pervasive cultures of, and again, not to offend any cultures that were excluded from that just now, but it was the Mayas, Incas, and Aztecs who were the most pervasive cultures in Latin America, and they were constantly warring. Like they were beheading people, throwing people's head down. You saw the whole what was that Apocalypto. Even though that wasn't historic as historically accurate as it could have been, but point being, like you get a sense that people didn't always get along.
Yeah.
And I think I just want to comment on that because there is something kind of similar happening on Guam pre-colonization. Is embedded in the culture was like the different class systems. So it's not like most of these societies didn't have different classes before, colonialism or capitalism. Like those things definitely existed. It's that once colonialism happened, all those different classes were treated as one because they were, because colonialism is inherently racist. So it didn't matter that you were one of the rich Chamorros or the middle-class Chamorros. You were still considered beneath, the Spanish or the Japanese or the USians.
So Aqua, what's Jamaica's government like now?
So
let's just get into that.
Yeah. So what's interesting about Jamaica's government is, like I said, the governor general is the head of state for all intents and purposes. He's the guy that basically, after an election has been run and the winner has been declared, he's the guy that basically, after the party that won chooses who they want to be, quote unquote, prime minister, he's the guy that does the swearing in. He's the guy that dissolves the previous government and appoints the new one. Right. So it's basically the governor general appoints the prime minister, and the prime minister basically appoints his cabinet or the ministers that you guys would call them secretaries. Right. So, you have your secretary of state, secretary of housing. So like you guys would call them secretaries. We call them Jamaica and most Commonwealth countries call them ministers. So ministers of technology, education, housing, health, the different bits and pieces that make up and run the government. And then beneath those guys, that's where the fun stuff starts, right? Because like we still have a House and a Senate, right? Which essentially, so your senators are appointed based off of, I think it's the winning party gets the most senators, clearly, because our senators, fun fact, and House of Representatives and representatives of the House of Representatives don't actually get elected. Those guys are actually chosen again from the winning and losing, from the two parties that essentially ran in the election. So basically, those guys are political appointees, right? So the only election that really matters is for prime minister, because that's the guy that gets to choose everybody. And this might not sound familiar to you, but Canada actually is a Commonwealth country. There is a governor general in Canada, and no, Justin Trudeau isn't the liberal Jesus complex guy that you guys think he is. No, he's beholden to the Queen as much as Andrew Holness in Jamaica is beholden to the Queen and the Governor General.
And sorry. I'm just kind of looking too at the outline that we kind of have, and Jamaica has a parliamentary system, correct?
Yeah.
So just to make it clear for people, whereas in the United States government we have what's called a separation of powers, where the executive, the legislature, and the judicial are all separate. Parliamentary is rather a fusion of powers, where the head of government, in the United States, the president is also the head of government and the head of state. In parliamentary systems like the UK, I guess, for example, the head of state is actually the Queen, and that's more of a symbolic role, obviously. And the head of government is the prime minister, which, but the prime minister essentially flows from the legislature. So, parliamentary systems are kind of cool because shit actually happens a little bit quicker, right?
he's worried that granny's gonna get on her horse.
Oh yeah,
come across.
I gotta say my graces to the queen before I talk shit about her, right? Yeah.
And do the queen way. You have
I
to
gotta do the queen way. Yeah. So is that a sufficient kind of example in Jamaica where? And how many parties are there too now? Does Jamaica still? Because just because the parliamentary system exists doesn't mean that it won't have a two-party duopoly. We could see this in Canada, just kind of a third party, but like not really. It's mostly a two-party system with some coalition building needed to run a winning coalition, right? Government.
Yeah. I mean, one of the nations. Let me talk about Jamaica first. So I have my qualms about the parliamentary system, mostly because like I've seen the way that the U.S. separation of powers have worked, and some of the quirks that I worry about with Jamaica, for instance, is the prime minister can suspend your human rights at any time, right? And they use what's called emergency powers all the time to do that. Like this last administration, which is the current administration for all intents and purposes, the Andrew Holness administration has used what's called zones of special operations that basically suspends your usual rights. Like people get held in prisons up to 18 months is the most publicized case. And like that's because the parliament granted him those powers, right? Whereas in the United States, it'll take a lot more than just a majority vote in the House to get the president to the point where he can suspend elections or suspend people's rights.
There's a lot more deliberation in our system, right? I mean, there has to be a transactional, between all kind of. Well, I mean, I'm saying that tentatively because we have a president right now who obviously doesn't kind of abide by those sort of. But yeah.
Trump is interesting. Trump is interesting because he tests the idea of the powers of the executive office and what confines that existed in. Like, remember, I want to argue that the most blatant abuses of the executive office have started under like Nixon, Reagan, right, and proliferated under Billy. What do you guys call him?
I would even say FDR, man, is probably like an even earlier example. I mean, in a good way, but that's even an earlier example of using the presidency as like kind of a bully pulpit, right?
Legit, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing. Like Obama expanded a lot of the Bush era policies of neocolonialism and endless wars. And I posit that all Trump is doing is essentially continuing those policies and expanding upon them in a very public way. Like light gets shown on all of the ills of the government now because it's a Republican in there, and ironically, as Fox News likes to point out, most news organizations are liberal, right? And that's indisputable based on data from the Washington Post and the New York Times themselves. Light gets shown on the atrocities that the government commits, like the hysterectomies that Kennedy was alluding to earlier. Like, I'm not going to say that hysterectomies were occurring under the Obama administration, but the cages and the kids in cages, the deportations, like basically this is just another logical step in that direction, direction of being anti-immigrant.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, I guess not to close it out. I mean, we can, but just for, I guess, my participation in this discussion, this specific topic is like, it's like each president just kind of succeeds the next in seeing how much like heinous shit they could get away with, right? And it's like, Trump is just the only reason why people are so upset about Trump is because he's so outwardly grotesque. But it's like, nah, man, Bill Clinton kind of built this architecture for mass incarceration of like immigrants, right? Guantanamo Bay was originally used.
Joe Biden, brother, don't forget, with the help of Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton.
Oh yeah, and Strom Thurmond and our segregationist word, dude. Like, it's
I remember these people's name. I never pass up an opportunity to remind people who these.
Yeah, for sure.
How do y'all think? how do y'all think years later
Go ahead. Sorry.
these countries are operating as democracies, and what stages of development are they in, and what still needs to be accomplished and unfortunately there are countries that attained independence in the early 1900s that are still kind of dealing with what they got left with fiscally. So what do y'all feel like the situation is internationally for some of these countries?
I feel like I can answer kind of accurately for Guam, that we're technically not a country, we're a U.S. territory. But I think that there is a great awakening happening with people's kind of like civil engagement with their governments, especially because the local government is notoriously corrupt and folds to the U.S. military's desires a lot. I think that there is a great pushback from the youth movements there, the indigenous youth movements and the collective like Micronesian Islands, to push back against kind of militaristic, neoliberal thinking and tendencies within the local government. So I think that there is going to be like a huge resurgence of electoral involvement from young leftists there, but also just the radical elements of the population that are, that don't have a real faith in the electoral system. So I think it's mirroring what we have here in America on a like much smaller scale.
Anybody else have thoughts on local economy, local democracy, and how things are holding up?
Yeah,
Well,
please go ahead.
no, I mean, I just want to add to that. I mean, this is more of a general case, but any country that does not play ball with the United States, they're subject to sanctions, which people, I mean, as leftists, we all know this, but like these economic sanctions are pretty much like economic terrorism, right? I mean, if anyone thinks that sanctions harm the leaders, the so-called corrupt or non-participating leaders of a country, what it really does is it hurts like the people, right? Certain supplies. I'm listening to, this is a little bit off topic, but I'm listening to Blowback, that podcast about the Iraq War with Brendan James and Noah Colwin. And if we talk like colonialism, imperialism, like that show is fucking insane. And the sanctions that were placed on Iraq in the 90s were so evil because there were some things that were allowed in and other things that weren't allowed in, right? So, for example, they would get the equipment, right? Medical equipment for certain medical procedures, right? But not get the medicine. People would get, I mean, that would be if you wanted to like bake a cake, right? And you went and got like eggs and flour and you didn't get any milk. You know what I'm saying? Like, and these things were done on purpose to weaken the country, right? Not just economically, but actually socially through social unrest. So I think that, broadly speaking, looking at these countries that have been like historically exploited, you see high levels of, poverty, infant mortality rates, a lower literacy rate. I mean, just things that, are just effects, I guess, reverberations, right, of, colonialism, imperialism. So, yeah.
Yeah, like don't forget, like essentially sanctions are like a more technocratic way of like, instead of employing ships to besiege a city like Lincoln did in the 1860s in the Civil War. Like, because like the Civil War was interesting, and there's a lot that you can learn from it, because like essentially the South was that was one of the first wars in which the Navy was actually employed, right? These brand new heavy metal ships, and like essentially they besieged different towns and Confederate towns, and basically blockaded supplies from getting in and out. So like what Aaron was talking about a second ago in terms of sanctions, like sanctions are essentially a fancier, a more technocratic way of accomplishing that end. And like nowhere is that more exemplified than like Yemen, for instance. Like that, like the way that sanctions have been used in the Yemeni Saudi Arabian conflict, like it shows it's literally the big guy punching down and saying, yeah, you want to fight back, but we won't allow you. Like, we won't allow anybody to sell you arms. We won't allow anybody to come in and actually deliver humanitarian aid. Like, there has to be a reckoning with our neo-colonial past, and like the way that the United States is going and supporting these endless wars using those same barbaric and archaic tactics to subjugate peoples all over the world.
What does that look like to you?
To me, there has to be.
Well, I guess what it looks like to you personally, and if there's a difference between what you think the consensus should be. I don't know where you could personally draw that line, but yeah, what do you think should be done?
Like, there has to be somebody has to stand up to the United States, and it might not happen within our lifetimes, but we've seen like think about like the Roman Empire, for instance. Like, it was supposed to have been one of the greatest empires to have ever existed, right? The different Egyptian dynasties, the different dynasties in China, right? Like, all of these countries and rulers were supposed to have been the greatest in their time. But what we're seeing is like each and every one of these countries and rulers and dynasties fall, like time after time after time. And we are going to see, oh, Brandon, I think you're on mute, buddy.
Yeah. Do you feel that the ones that are maybe that as we go through history, do you feel like history is improving?
Medically, yeah. Technologically, yeah.
If you're talking about, empires rise and empires fall, do you feel like is there positive progress out of that, or is it neutral? And
like, there are going to be some people that say, there are some people that are going to be using objective data to say, longer human life, mortality rates from births, people's standard of living.
Basically, what I'm saying is, if you believe that we can, there has to be a confrontation with the United States.
There has to be. Like,
are you confident that what replaces the United States, whether that's 50 years from now or 150 years from now,
I don't think anything replaces
that will be better?
I don't think anything replaces the United States. Like, to be clear, no country replaced the United Kingdom, right? What essentially happened was just a shift of economic power, and that might happen. Europe might regain the economic mantle in another 200 years.
China, bro,
or
happening.
Asia Asia, with the help of different European powers, might actually gain that. But who knows? Africa might surprise us and actually come up with a coherent military, and come with a coherent military force to combat all the problems it's having, and actually emerge out of that peace, emerge as a world superpower. But no, I don't think that things are getting better. I see that I think that there will be an inevitable conflict based on history, based on what we have discussed throughout all this podcast. Colonialism breeds war.
I think that's very well said. Rara, I want to give you a chance to take the floor for a minute and talk in particular about the United Nations Special Committee on Decolonization. And as that relates, well, you do know about it. You just don't know the name of this stupid white wonk panel that is deciding the fate of your people. But
I'm guessing it has our non-voting congressional, like a congressperson on it.
I'm sure.
Like that, right?
So the United Nations Special Committee on Decolonization was established to basically go through a lot of these territories and and semi-independent nation states and sort of make sure that they were properly decolonized. I just want to say that Guam and Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands and American Samoa, all of our territories technically apply to this, but have been under investigation by the UN for over 60 years to see if they meet the status of being decolonized. Rara, what do you think?
Oh, it's a resounding no.
They
haven't been decolonized. It's actually just so absurd. Like, this is what I talk about when I'm talking about like who is on this committee? Like, I've never even heard of this. And like who is making all these decisions? Who is doing these assessments? Because if it's non-native people, it doesn't make any fucking sense. And also like the idea that that there can be any kind of like decolonization while the U.S. military is like still has a large presence on Guam is like laughable. Guam is a really small island. It's about 32 miles long and like 8 miles wide, I think, at the narrowest point, like 10 miles wide at the longest point. But 202 square miles is taken up by the U.S. military for military functions, for federal government functions. That's a huge chunk of land. And it was all stolen by the military, by the government, and stolen from Native people. And to this day, not a single solitary inch of that land has been given back to the people it was stolen from. And also, the government is now talking about taking more land in the form of a firing range for the Marines, and it's being proposed as like right on top of a really, really significant ancestral site called Litexen. And there is like a huge like movement on Guam of like indigenous people, of Chamorro people, that are saying that they don't want this firing range on like, you know, sacred land, basically. And of course, the U.S. government is like, well, we're listening, we're learning, but no. So it's like, it's really laughable when I hear about like panels and stuff like this, because it's just like, you know, it takes about 10 minutes to look at Guam and look at our resources and how they're allocated, and realize that indigenous Chamorros are poorer than ever. We're huddled onto like a smaller and smaller land mass, so the U.S. military can continue, you know, aggravating in the region. And we're scapegoated as being like the problem with economics there because of our poverty. And, you know, like like poor people everywhere are scapegoated for their own, you know, suffering and marginalization. And it happens on Guam just like everywhere else. So just the thought of like a bunch of like UN fucking lanyard troglodyte assholes assessing the the decolonization efforts on Guam is just really funny to me. So
you know they've got lanyards.
Oh, they all
you just know it. They've all got a. I'm on the committee. Aaron, Aqua, weigh in. What do you think about? Could semi-independent nation state ever mean something that's not bullshit? What does it mean for something to be decolonized? Is it actually hard to figure these things out? What do y'all think?
I mean, it just has to be. I think it just has to be complete economic interference from the United States, right? And it has to be trading or any sort of economic interaction with the U.S. has to be an actual contract, right? A fair contract. And unfortunately, it seems that the only way that the United States will take you seriously is if you have a formidable army and maybe some nuclear weapons, right? Like, I mean, I'm just realistically speaking, right? Like, it just does not seem like and also too, it also has to be with, unfortunately, I guess the backing of the international community. And at any sort of UN panel, I mean, who is pulling the strings, right? Who's offering favors or threatening countries if they don't agree with a certain, resolution, right? It's the United States, right? So in order for any of these countries to be independent, I mean, they have to have the military backing to enforce that sort of independence. And I mean, I'm not, I guess, I guess in a similar example is sort of I'm not into Juche or anything, man, but like North Korea, right? Like, I mean, like we know that they have at least like one, right? Or they have the capacity to build an atomic weapon, right? But Iran, right, who is using nuclear material for social purposes, right? I mean, as far as I know, and I believe that, right? What did the United States do? Right, kind of pigeonhole them, slap sanctions on them. But North Korea, like they're testing bombs like thousands of feet below ground, and the U.S. is a little bit more kind of,
There obviously are intense economic sanctions on
I
North
mean,
Korea.
yes, there are.
Sure.
But they certainly are assassinating North Korean generals.
Exactly.
There's less talk of a ground war on North Korea than there is with Iran. Like people are very ballsy about talking about like, yeah, we'll just send in the troops in Iran.
Because people fully understand that New York, Los Angeles, Texas, like all these major metropolitan areas will cease to exist if they fuck around and find out. Like,
which is funny because it's actually Guam would be the closest target, and people always forget that because our literal motto is where America's day begins, because it's technically where America's day begins.
Right.
So, and like we're geographically the closest and most strategically important like target, which is also another reason why there's groups calling for divestment from the U.S. military on Guam, because it would no longer make us a target for North Korea. They would have no reason to hit us if the U.S. wasn't there.
Right. So Guam would be the first place to cease to exist. Isn't that nice? 32 square miles.
Fantastic.
Right. 200 square miles. Right. But yeah, like you're talking about what it would take for nations to be truly independent. I mean, much of what Aaron said is on point. Like a decoupling from the U.S. economy and U.S. Political influence would be the first one. But there's a nice little trick that the U.S. has up its sleeve. It's called the Federal Reserve, and as long as the U.S. dollar is the trading currency, international trading currency, and the U.S. controls the Federal Reserve, then colonialism by currency, by fiat, is essentially the rule of the day. Like there can only be one ruling power in the world, and it is the United States because of its economic and let's just call it what it is, the war machine behind the country.
Yeah, well said. I think let's do one more quick topic before we wrap this up and move on to the post show.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Which I just want to quickly ask everybody here: can neoliberalism ever solve this?
No, I have an answer there really real quick.
It can make people really mad, so that they throw out the neoliberals. I think it can succeed. Yes.
No.
You're an accelerationist, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
We will descend into I mean, maybe actually, if you want to look at it that way, the fact that neoliberalism is the gateway to fascism, so like maybe then we can all have our glorious revolution that we've always wanted. But no, seriously speaking, though, like
Hope not.
Nah, man. Neoliberalism is the drive for the impoverishment of like all of these countries, right? Jamaica included, Guam included. Still considered a territory, right? 4 million people, like who are technically considered United States U.S. residents, American citizens, live outside of the United States, right? Like that shit is like, man, the only thing we need is like a worldwide proletarian like fucking revolution, dude, to like, to like pretty much like kill the snake that is the United States, because it's just extraction for extraction's sake, right? It's just accumulation for accumulation's sake. So, nah, man.
Consolidating of those resources too, and I think that's accelerated in like island nations like Jamaica and Guam and the other Marianas Islands, is because that consolidation is just so much more obvious and quicker than in much larger land masses. So I think like if neoliberalism contributes to anything, it is the accelerationist movement of basically uniting people in their hatred of U.S. Hegemony. So I don't think it's a solution. Obviously, I don't want it to happen. It's going to cause a lot of pain and suffering, but we're already in suffering and in pain. So it's like, who can say?
Hey, there ain't no struggle without victory, right?
it can.
Well, there ain't no victory without struggle, rather.
Reverse.
I was gonna say we've been.
Yeah.
You live in
Plenty of
nihilist
struggles
now.
without victory,
Acceleration is
unfortunately.
you live in the
Told
South.
y'all I was a
You've seen
Posadas fan.
struggles without victory, but I'll tell you, like it takes time and patience. Obviously, none of this stuff can be done overnight, but it's good that people are thinking and talking about solutions, and hopefully talking about things that can be done on the local level. That whether it's our consumer choices or whether it's regulating these businesses that have so much wealth that's been extracted from overseas, right, and regulating them in positive ways, and every bit counts, and that's all important. So, Kennedy, what else do we got? I feel like we've kind of covered it.
Wrap this up. I appreciate everybody for watching. I appreciate our guests. Let's go through real quick. Rara, plug some stuff.
Plug some stuff. Okay, well, I actually will be having my inaugural Twitch stream. It's a 3-hour weekly stream that's going to be happening every Wednesday from 6 to 9 EST. And it's called the Hot Girl Agenda, and it's going to be basically like news and analysis from a leftist perspective, and also interviewing community organizers, basically non-men community organizers for the most part, and just doing like fun femme shit for leftists, like makeup tutorials and fashion advice and advice stuff. So it's a mixture of like pop culture and news analysis and interviews and stuff like that. So you can check it out. It's my Patreon is patreon.com/islandgoth, and I'm at islandgoth on Twitter. So it starts at the $3 level, by the way. So if you're broke like me, you can still afford to like kind of be in on the groundwork of something really, really cool. So yeah.
And Rara, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences, and just, you know, your lived life with, you know, Guam's colonization and all that stuff. We just appreciate it so much. Aaron, what do you got going on?
What's up, y'all? So just my Twitter, which is Posadas_TrapGD. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm gonna be coming out with launching a podcast in October. First 5 guests are gonna include Brandon. You are going to be one of the first 5. A comrade from chair of Southside Chicago Southside DSA, and Glenn Greenwald. I've already interviewed him. Matt Christmas from Chapo, and I'm gonna be talking to Mariah Parker up in Athens.
Yeah.
Right. So County Commissioner of District 2 in Athens. So all those episodes are gonna be dropping in the first week of October to kind of build a little bit of hype. And I'll link the Patreon to my Twitter, whatever, when I get that shit figured out. So yeah.
That's going to be some big stuff. Actually, I have money on both of these shows being bigger than our show. Like,
yeah.
Mariah's going to be on my stream.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, hey, Roar, you're coming on my show too.
Yeah,
like, so,
yeah, we're all going to be.
Like, yeah.
This is going to be big. Just,
please have a drop of clouds.
And Aaron, if y'all love Aaron is also on our streams.
Oh yeah,
most Wednesdays.
Yeah,
so,
I'll be there tomorrow too.
Come back tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll be here tomorrow
for more Aaron.
And also, while we're talking tomorrow, planning to have Tamara Johnson Shealy, who, you know, we had a scheduling mix up with her last week. U.S. Senate candidate. If you live in Atlanta, you know who she is. She's very cool. Mr. Walters, what's going on in your world, dog?
You know, like, I mean, everybody has all these nice podcasts and all these things going on.
You can just be living, dog. Like,
it's fine.
No. Kennedy and I were talking earlier. And if I had to plug anything, it would be like, look, if you're doing some dope shit out there, and you need business advice, talk to me, right? Like, outside of my ranting about capitalism and the US's interference in the Caribbean, what I do on a day-to-day basis is essentially help small businesses figure out their shit. And Kenny, like I said, Kenny and I were talking about that earlier. But you know, if anybody out there needs help reach out. Like, I'm happy to give free consultations to members of the community to help get you from just an Etsy or even from the ground idea to an actual business that's making money. Because like we said, like, we need the revolution to be funded, right? And y'all got to support these guys Patreon somehow. So reach out to me.
Y'all support enough fucking white podcasters from Brooklyn. Fucking throw me and Rara and fucking Kennedy and Brandon some fucking money, that ass.
Love it.
I approve of that message.
I just gotta say, Aqua's making this sound real casual, like, yeah, just hit me up. I just want to say Aqua is a very professional consultant, and y'all should be lucky to talk to him and get some of his time. So when he throws these offers out there that, like, there's free consulting on the line, y'all should not be looking at that like, oh, okay, whatever. Y'all should be, anybody who's watching
but the opportunity
business should be like, damn, okay, this is the real deal. So yeah,
this is becoming very real deal for everybody. It's the last couple of months. I'm really kind of excited on what the rest of the year may have coming. And Kennedy, I know you've got a couple of cool things that we're working on. So it's going to be an interesting couple months. You're in the right place if you just want to see cool shit happen.
Hell yeah.
We're doing cool shit all the time.
Bring the South back, yo. Let's go.
That's right.
Hell yeah.
We went from that very serious discussion about the world to, hey, this is happening too.
Just plugging out shit. Like,
it's important.
Hey, like, we all gotta eat.
Yeah, it's important for
you do a revolution if you're hungry.
Hell yeah.
You can, but I wouldn't recommend it. Listen. Yeah, it's also good to not burn yourself out and do some things that are kind of entertaining. So you want to be watching all that.
Speaking of entertaining stuff, if you're a patron, check out the post show. Be coming in just a few minutes. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/notsafe, and just $1 gets you access to the post shows.
$1 for now. Every day I say we need to move it to $5. So
it is gonna
argue like it's $5. I start singing the Subway song, $5 post show. So man, if you're watching this and $1 is available, get in there and take it.
Real talk, our lowest level Patreon level is just probably gonna go up. It's probably gonna be like $2 or $3 for these post shows in a couple, like a month or so. And like, this is something we've been talking about and letting y'all know for a while could happen. So now's your chance. Get in there for $1. You can have access to these post shows forever for just $1 a month if you sign up now.
Basically, that's all very long and chilly, but I want to say, as somebody who has worked in advertising, sometimes when people say limited time offer, like, it's bullshit. That's why we're nailing it down. We're saying this so hard because it's like limited time offer, but no, for real, this is not clickbait. This is real. But anyway, thanks for watching. Come hang out with us. It's been real. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.